So today it's going to be all about government registrations and government certifications. But before we do that, we want to recognize Lily Keefe, who is the USDOT Northwest Small Business Transportation Resource Center key partner for helping us get this made available to you today. And also Tiffany Scroggs she's a program manager at Washington PTAC, and Colleen McAleer from Clallam County EDC. She really, these three ladies have helped tremendously with Jessica and me trying to get this developed and fleshed out and made available to you today and this month. So we want to thank them for their participation. Some other housekeeping notes is that we are recording this, and the recording will be available a little bit later. And I think Andrew just posted the links to the YouTube channels for Washington PTAC and the SBTRC. So if you missed a session, you're welcome to go back and view the videos through YouTube. Let's see. Oh, and also all of the resources we had dropped into our Dropbox, and we sent you the link. So you'll find there the actual slideshows. And then there's a resource folder that kind of covers everything that I'm talking about today. Resources if you're a veteran, if you're woman-owned, if you're minority-owned or hub zone locations. Anyway, all of those are available to you for you to download. And I see that Jessica just posted our little poll on housekeeping, asking if you were able to receive the session materials in advance. And we're hoping that you did. So as we move through this, we are going to go ahead and have you post any of your questions in the chat. And then when we get done with each session, Jessica or Andrew will, call up those questions, and we'll see if we can get you some answers. So the first session on government registration is going to run until about 1 o'clock. And after that is done, we're going to take a short break from 1 o'clock to about 1:10. And then we're going to start the government certification process. And this is really an intense session, where we talk about state and federal certifications and, so many other resources that you need. And actually on that session, we're going to have a guest speaker, Caleb McAville from OMWBE. So you might want to get prepared to ask him some questions about getting certified as a DBE or a WBE or MBE in the state of Washington. So I think with that, we're, let me see, I think we're pretty close to go ahead and getting started. So you see the results of the poll. Most everybody got the materials. If you did not get the materials, if you would email Jessica, and Jessica will put her email in the chat, and just let her know that you need the material link. So let me kind of get started here. and tell you a little bit about Washington PTAC. And those of you who have participated in our events over the last week, we just have this drill that we do at the beginning of each session. So PTAC is the Procurement Technical Assistance Center, and we are funded through Congress in the Defense Appropriations Bill. And the Department of Defense enters into a cooperative agreement with agencies like economic development agencies, chambers of commerces, colleges and universities. So we're spread all over the United States. We have Washington PTAC has matching funds from Thurston Economic Development Center, Greater Spokane Incorporated, the Kitsap Economic Development, and more of those. And there are 93 PTACs across the United States. And of there's 400 counselors. In Washington State, we have 12 counselors that are available to answer your questions. So moving forward, okay. Next slide. So the PTACs help Washington State small businesses with everything, federal, state, and local governments, finding opportunities, helping you interpret the solicitations and regulations, doing certifications, registrations, and marketing to government buyers. And we provide workshops, one-on-one counseling sessions, matchmaking events, and then we have the optional bid match service, and that's it's free for 30 days, and it actually sends you an email with things that you're interested in. If you're in construction and you want to know, say you have a painting company, and we would help fine tune your profile so that you just get painting jobs. Anyway, if you want more information with that, please feel free to contact me. And my information is on the end of each slideshow. And the rest of Washington PTAC in the Kitsap office information is all available on there if you need that information. Okay, next slide. So today, this morning, or this afternoon, it's all about registrations. So we're going to talk about, first things first, the Washington Secretary of State, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Office of Minority and Women Business Enterprises, the Department of Enterprise Services, Washington WEBS, and then the Municipal Research and Services Center. At the federal level, we're going to talk about SAM.gov. And historically, when I first started doing government contracting counseling, every agency had its own login and username, passwords, and nobody talked to each other. So now, SAM, must have been about 5 years ago, started the process so that they have assimilated all these other agencies. And so it's not as a burden as it used to be on trying to keep track of everything. Okay, next slide. So after this class is over, we are going to talk about state certifications, and then the federal certifications after that. But at the state level, you self-certify in WEBS, and in the Office of Minority and Business Enterprises, this is a little bit of alphabet soup as to what type of entity you might be qualified to be certified as. And then the Washington State Department of Veterans Affairs will go over that certification process in the certification section. Next slide. Okay, so, this is just a summary of what we're going to do again today. So next slide. All right, but first, what you want to do is apply for a federal tax ID number, because without that, you cannot be registered anywhere, state, local, anything without that. And all of these links will take you directly to these agencies. And getting your online application is really simple. And it really only takes like 10 minutes, and you can print out the official letter with your new federal tax ID number. So if you have a new company or you're thinking about a new company, that's step number one. Okay, next slide. Washington Secretary of State. If you go to their website, they are going to direct you to both of these YouTube links. One is creating a user account, and the other is registering a business. And one of the first things they will ask you there is what's your federal tax ID number? And then it's all the similar information. Secretary of State asks you everything about your company. Are you a LLC? Are you a S Corp, a C Corp? Proprietors are not required to be registered with the Secretary of State. Everybody else is. So if you're a partnership, so that's the first step. And then once you get registered with the Secretary of State, it takes you to all of the internal state of Washington departments, like labor and industries, employment security. And now, they kind of feed the information through. And Washington State now has like one login. And they were very similar to the federal government years ago, where you had a different login for each agency. And now you have one login. And so, you still have to remember your passwords and stuff. But anyway, it's a pretty simplified process. Next slide. Okay, so once you have been registered in the state of Washington, the next thing that you need to register for is the Washington Electronic Business Solutions, which is called WEBS. And I'm going to see if we can do this. Jessica is an old hand at that, but I'm a little bit new. Jessica, can you click on the link on there and open it up for us? And we'll see what comes up.
Was everyone able to do this?
Yeah, that's perfect. So in here, the third bullet down, if you are a vendor, well, actually, you need to go to Webs for Vendors. And up there, that is where you will click into that to become, to register now. It's right next to the login at the bottom. Anyway, you would register now on that. And can you go ahead and click on the register now? And when you get in there on to register, they have a great big information page that you have to accept the terms for the state of Washington. And, if you're working from home or from your office, feel free to bring up the slideshow that we have provided for you. And you can just kind of walk through all the links yourselves. But yeah, so there's the register now link. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that you have to attest to this and agree to that. And then once you agree, then it will allow you to go in. And Jessica, this is where we can go back to the slideshow, because I have screenshots of the internal that will give you some guidance on doing the Washington webs. And while that's popping up, I wanted to tell you guys, I got an email about an hour ago from the Washington State Department of Enterprise Services. And it was a notice for all veteran-owned small businesses that, because you're registered in Washington Webs, and you are registered in DVA, the Department of Veteran Affairs, that they have a surplus material that is available for the veteran-owned businesses. So anyway, so we've been through the Washington Webs page, and just go ahead and click the next page. And I showed this on one of our previous events. Just go back a slide, Jessica. And it has the, realistically, this is all they ask. What is your name and email address? And, do you want to display stuff? Yes or no? What is the company name? Federal tax ID number. And then they want things like gross revenue, number of employees, years in business. And they need your Washington State UBI number, which you get from the Secretary of State, or if you're a proprietor, you would get it from the Department of Revenue. The ownership profile, they're looking for diversity. And then if you have any certifications, like if you're an engineer and you have a PE, or you're an accountant, you're a CPA, or you're a doctor, MD, and then the corporate location information. Okay, next slide. And once you get that completed, it opens up a window that looks like this. And on the left-hand side, where you can manage your commodity codes and your geographic designations, your commodity codes. If you're a painter, you want to look at painting opportunities. If you are a really small company and you want to just stay within your own county, or maybe you're looking to expand and you want to include the whole state, you can pick and choose that. And you see on here, this was a little solicitation at that time. So this was actually last year. And what the who posted it, the Department of Transportation or Parks and Rec, Fish and Wildlife, who the contact is. And if you click on the hyperlinks on there, and these are not hyperlinks on the slideshow, but you can drill down into each one and get additional information. So this is Washington Webs, and we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about the Department of Veterans Affairs. To be a certified veteran-owned business, you have to have at least 51% of the controlling interest of the business and it has to be operated in Washington State. Washington State brings a couple issues to the forefront in regards to community property. And so if you have questions about the community property issues, we can connect you with Jennifer Montgomery. And on this slide, I have the link that'll actually take you to the, you see there's two different links on this page. One is to the business registry, and then the other one is for veteran-owned business. So feel free to click through both of those. But next slide, Jessica. The thing about the registration, the first thing up at the top, it says you have to be registered in WEBs. And so you have to have supporting materials, proof of your military service, proof of your ownership, and proof that you are incorporated in the state of Washington. And you can be incorporated in another state, but you have to be registered to do business in the state of Washington. And that's where the Secretary of State would come in to help you with this. But, and then this logo right here on the bottom right-hand corner, this is actually the decal that you would then put on your marketing materials. And they work very closely with the Department of Veterans Affairs and Washington State Department of Enterprise Services. So anyway, it's really not a difficult application. Name, address, business information, military information, and that's it. So next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about OMWBE, the Office of Minority and Women Business Enterprises. And again, there's two different links on here. And there's 6 different certifications that you can get through OMWBE. And when our guest comes in this afternoon, he said he'd be here about 1:45. Any questions that you have specific to this, just let us know. Actually OMWBE, they're just like every other state agency right now, trying to accommodate everyday business via Zoom. And, so I think they're a little bit behind on the verification process and the certification of the businesses. Okay, next slide.
I'm sorry, Leslie, we have a question coming through the chat. We have someone wondering about the the veteran certification. He's been waiting to hear back after he has submitted his documentation. From your experience, how long does that take for them to get back to you?
Well, historically, they were really pretty fast, but the key individual is Jennifer Montgomery. And actually, Andrew, if you would pull up Jennifer Montgomery's information from the DVA and just put that in the chat. Jessica, go back one more slide, would you please? Mailing it, you can email the documents to the vob@dva.wa.gov, but if you wanted to talk to a real person, you need to talk to Jennifer Montgomery. And she was always right on top of every issue that any of our clients had. And so I would really like to say that you get this resolved. and if you can't get in touch with her, send me a note and we'll work through this and see where we can take that. Okay, so next slide. All right, so let's talk about the Washington State Department of Enterprise Services. The reality is, once you registered in WEBS, DES knows who you are. And so we have some screenshots on here for you on doing business with them. So when you get to the home page, go ahead and click on for business. And then next slide, please. And then when you get in there, you know, you can register in WEBS, you know, if you had not done that before. And but you have to log into WEBS in order to see what's on DES. And then you'll have available to you goods and services, construction projects, you know, consultant services. And they also have a small works roster for contractors, which this is one of many resources for small works rosters. So you might want to take a look at this. And the reality is, you know, it's for you to be aware of opportunities, but you know, you can also see who's bidding on things. So you need to pay attention to who your competition is. But anyway, this is just a screenshot from DES. And we'll go on to the next slide. And then, like, if you went to click on current contracts, you would click on the search current contracts. And just go back a little bit, one slide, Jessica. And anyway, and then they would, you know, we have full classes, all day classes on how to do searching of contracts. And, you know, so you could type in commodity code, because you need commodity codes. You need to know what they are when you're registered in Washington WEBS. And then, you know, so you put in the commodity code that you're interested in, and it'll give you a laundry list of current and past activities. And, you know, it takes a little bit of getting used to the process. And again, if you have any questions or problems in doing this, just let me know. Okay, next slide.
Sorry,
And
a quick question. Where can people find a list of commodity codes to use?
That's in Washington WEBS. And if you go back to Washington WEBS and, you know, after you get through that introductory page where you have to agree or not agree, yeah, so right after this, it takes you to, you know, your geographic locations, your commodity codes. So go ahead, go to the next slide, not the previous one. Yeah, right here. That right on top, that's where all the commodity codes are. And that's where you would want to look on the top left-hand side in the green is, you know, that's where you will do your search for the commodity codes.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So we'll move forward a little bit. And I know that we were coming up on the MRSC, Multiple Research and Services Center. And this resource right here is worth its weight in gold. And they have two plans. you can either have the free application or you can do the enhanced application, which is $75 a year. And then you get daily or weekly emails on who's buying what based on your criteria. And I did a real quick little sample on Clallam County. I wanted to see what agencies were registered in Clallam County. And so, this is the list from Clallam, which is not a really big list. If you were to type in King County or Snohomish, you'd have a much bigger list. But if you, Jessica, can you click on the participating agencies for the second bullet right there? And, so you can go in and see, if it's fire districts or, PUDs or, whoever it happens to be. Okay, so, and this is actually a really slick little map. So Jessica, just go ahead and click on the county of interest that you're looking at. And in Kitsap County, these are all of the agencies that are registered with MRSC. And you get them in a couple different places. The other place that they're registered is with the Department of Enterprise Services. So you just need to keep your eyes open. If you're some kind of a sewer support company and you want to work with the Kitsap County Sewer District, or any of the sewer districts around the state, this is where you would find that information. Okay, thanks, Jessica. Let's go back to the slideshow. Okay, so go ahead and go back one. So we did, that's a really quick overview. And the reality is, on the state, the only real registrations that you have are Washington Webb's and the Department of Veterans Affairs and OMWBE. And because we're doing the veterans and OMWBE in the next section, we'll give you more detail about those, a little bit later today. So at the federal level, this is going to be so much fun in the next month. The system for award management is sam.gov. And you need to pay attention because the old version was sam.gov, and 5 years ago or so, they started implementing a new version, which is beta.sam.gov. And the beta SAM goes into effect on April 26th. So the old version of SAM, I'll have some screenshots here for you, but that is like, the one-stop shop moving forward. In the past, everything had to have a different registration, username, passwords, and it was really complex trying to see the coordination from one agency to the other agency. But now in the new version, they are continuing to move things under one umbrella. The Veterans Administration has a certification, a certified veteran enterprise that they are currently managing. And this is going to be one of the fallouts of this big transition, is the VA's verification of veteran-owned small businesses is migrating over to the Small Business Administration. And but once you register in SAM, the Small Business Administration knows who you are. And everything that's under the Veterans Administration right now, the legacy on the businesses will be transferred over to the SBA. So, veteran-owned small business, service-disabled veteran-owned small business. The number one criteria is your veteran status. And then they're going to talk to you about the ownership, you know, majority owner, community property issues, you know, all that comes back into play. And, you know, if you, let's say that you owned a company with two other people and it was an LLC, and there's 3 members in the LLC, and one of the members is a service disabled veteran. The ownership cannot be split up evenly. And, you know, if you did 33, 33, and 34%, and the veteran was 34%, that does not qualify it as a veteran-owned small business. The ownership has to be 51% of the company. And then the control of the company, you know, is the veteran active in day-to-day operations? You know, signs checks, makes all the management decisions. You know, there's a lot of criteria in regards to what constitutes control. And then the required documentation based on if you're S Corp, C Corp, LLC, LLP, partner, or whatever. So you have to gather all that stuff before you start. Okay, next slide. So I'm posting up the SBA resource page for the Seattle office. You can call them up, but under this contracting guide, they have information on all of this. Basic requirements, you know, types of contracts, size standards. And if you look in the resource folder that I gave you on the link, the size standards are in there, and you can see, you know, within different NAICS codes, you know, if you're in construction and you're a general contractor, you have to make less than $39.5 million per average year. And that's currently 3-year average. And they're moving, because of COVID, they're moving the averages to 5 years, but that has not taken place yet. But anyway, the size standards, if you're a general contractor, 236, 220, I think is the NAICS code, $39.5 million. So if you average $39 million, you are still small business. So think about that as you're going head to head on a project, you know, and maybe your company makes, you know, $20 million a year. But you're coming head to head with somebody that's, you know, right at 39.4. Anyway, you just have to know that difference. But if you're a painting contractor, you have a different NAICS code. And And you know, like if you're in aerospace, and you're Boeing, you know what the delineation is for aerospace manufacturers? It's numbers of employees. So if you are an aerospace manufacturer that has less than 1,000 employees, you are a small business. And, you know, if you have 1,001, you are large business. So if you're a painter and you've got 10 employees, they don't look at dollars. I think it's like 50 employees is what keeps you as small in some of the subsets of the general contracting. Okay, next slide. And this is, you know, I showed this the other day, and it is knowing about SAM. With SAM, they have integrated FBO, which used to be known as Federal Business Opportunities or FedBizOps, wage determination, which was wage determinations of labor, and the excluded parties list system, CFDA, entity registration, and FPDS. All of those are now in SAM, whereas 5 years ago, it was only SAM by itself. So once you get registered in SAM, then it won't, it'll be like one-stop shopping that you can find your resources right there. Okay, next slide. All right, so what do you need to be registered in the federal database? You need a DUNS number, which, oh, by the way, they're changing to I think it's UEI code. But if you still need a DUNS number, you have to go to this link that I put on here, and that'll take you directly to the federal government portion of Dun & Bradstreet. And so the thing is that the reason that they're changing from DUNS to UEI, anybody have any idea? Other than this just massive overhaul? Well, I'll give you some thoughts as Washington PTAC over the last decade or so. The problem is Dun & Bradstreet, well, let me back up. Back when the federal government instituted SAM, they figured out that they needed a way to keep track of the businesses that were going to be registered in there. So they put out a solicitation looking for somebody that could manage the enrollment process and get a digital unifying number. And so when Dun & Bradstreet saw the solicitation and they read that they were looking for a digital unifying numbering system, and the acronym for that was DUNS, they jumped at that opportunity. And they were awarded this long-lived arrangement with the federal government. And in about 2014, 2015, people were getting lots and lots of robocalls from Dun & Bradstreet. And, you know, they're always trying to sell you something and you couldn't opt out. And according to the federal government, all you need is a DUNS number. You do not need to subscribe to anything with Dun & Bradstreet. So basically, the federal government did an investigation and decided to not move forward with them in the new system. So Dun & Bradstreet will be left hanging. and you might still get calls on, from them about DUNS numbers, but you do not need to buy one thing from them. And I told that to my clients repeatedly. But if you have an existing DUNS number, you're safe probably for another year or two until they, figure out the UEI code. The second thing you need is your federal tax ID number. A new thing that they didn't used to have is you need a signed notarized letter within 60 days of the activation of your profile. You need to be able to put in what type of entity you are. Are you an LLC? Are you an S Corp? And then you need core data. And the core data, your name, your address, all that other stuff, has to be exactly the way Dun & Bradstreet has it in their profile. So if I have a little company called L. Miller Consulting, and because I am a proprietor, Dun & Bradstreet has me as Miller, L Consulting. And so I have to make sure that my SAM profile has the exact same information. So before you register in SAM, you probably want to get a printout of your DUNS account so that you get everything exactly correct. You need your NAICS code. The NAICS code comes from the US Census Bureau. It's called the North American Industry Classification Code. And if we were in my classroom, we would be clicking on that link and we'd be popping up the Census Bureau website, and you can type in landscaping or architect or painting or accounting, and it'll bring up a whole range of NAICS codes that are relative to that. If I'm an accountant, but not a CPA, that's a different NAICS code. If I am a financial advisor, that's a different NAICS code. So you need to spend some time looking at these links and determining which one of these are best for you. The same thing on the PSC and FSC codes. And this website is actually part of the national PTAC system. So PSC is Product Service Code, and FSC is Federal Service Codes. And if I do excavation, there's a specific code if I'm doing like bridges, or if I'm doing like landscaping excavation. So anyway, just peruse that a little bit, and it'll give you some additional information. They also need financial information and small business status. Well, how do you know what your small business status is? The only one that determines your small business status is the Small Business Administration. And the only way you get that information is off of that link for small business size standards. And anyway, and I have that, I actually have the spreadsheet downloaded into the resource folder for you. All right. And, they ask a lot of other stuff. There's a section in SAM called Reps and Certs, Representations and Certifications. And I don't know how they came up with that nomenclature, but the reality is these are all extracts from the Federal Acquisition Register, FARS, or the Defense Federal Acquisition Register. and they ask you yes or no questions on all this minutia. Do you provide IT services to the Middle East? And you have to answer all of these correctly. Initially, the first time you see SAM, it can be overwhelming. And I know that my clients, before they called me, would spend a couple days trying to figure it out. And but if you have somebody who knows what they're doing that can actually help you through this, the reality, a SAM application from start to finish, other than getting the letter notarized, should be an hour, maybe hour and a half. So just keep that in mind, because like I say, if it gets to be overwhelming, call your local PTAC. All right, next slide.
Leslie, we have a question coming through the chat.
Okay.
And the question is the EPLS the same as finding out if someone is debarred?
Yes, blacklisted and debarred. And actually, I'm glad that Jessica has this slide up, because in the old SAM, right on the home page where it says search records, that's where you would go in. And I would recommend that you go in there before April 26th and do a search on your company, your staffing, your CFO, your CEO, your contract manager, whoever is doing anything. Just make sure you get a report. You type in Leslie Miller and her social security number, and it needs to come up, say no report found. And then you have to print that out and put that in the employee file. And if you're doing federal contracts, you will need to have proof that the key individuals at your company are not debarred. And the contracting officer will know if the company is debarred, but they won't know if you are debarred. Okay. So, looking at this page here, the old SAM.gov was, it took a little while to get used to, but it was very comfortable to work in. And so, you can create a user account. And this is the thing. You have to create a user account first, and that's you, the individual. And let's say that you are the CFO, and so you're going to manage the federal registrations. So this is you, your phone number, et cetera, password. After you've created your user account, then you go in and you register your company. And yes, you can have multiple companies in there. And so the thing about the user account is one thing. When you register the entity, you have points of contact in there, and it needs to be more than one person. They give you alternates in all aspects. Government sales and billing and, marketing, or, a bunch of different areas. So you should have two different individuals listed as your points of contact all the way through the POC section of the entity. And I know I told our session last week, I had a client where the guy who did all of the registrations, all the federal and state registrations, retired, and the IT guys, just killed his email address. And so all the renewal information, didn't go anywhere. So we had to get that fixed immediately. But go ahead, next slide, Jessica. And no, go back. Okay, this is the new version of SAM. And yeah, it says 426 is when it's changing. And you can go in there and kind of look around. And but I can tell you the learning curve on this, because it's so heavily encumbered now with all those other departments in it, it's going to take a while to get this under your belt and my belt. We have ongoing classes through Washington PTAC and GSA. And GSA, General Services Administration, is the one who's managing the new SAM. So you might want to sign up for GSA newsletters or updates. Okay, next slide. Okay, so you're registered in SAM, and right before you get to the very end of your registration, you'll see that it says overview, purpose of registration, core data, assertions, reps and certs, points of contact, and then it says small business certification. And a word of warning: if you skip over this, you cannot finish your application. You have to click on this little button that has the red arrow in it. And that opens up in a different window to your SBA profile. And what I do is I open up the other window, I come back to SAM and finish SAM and submit SAM, and then go back to the SBA window that's open and finish that. So it pulls data from SAM, and you can edit it after SAM, you're done with SAM. But anyway, just, so that you know this step. Okay, next step, next slide. Okay, so dsbs.sba.gov is also a really great resource for finding who's doing what in your area. So I did a really quick, simple search for Clallam County on the construction NAICS code. And this is what I came up. What I want you to see is what's important on here. You see there's 4 blank lines under capability narratives. What that tells me is that these people never went into their profile and added their capability narrative. And the capability narrative is what the contracting officer looks for. And, like, it's your elevator speech in a small paragraph. And if any of these guys with the blanks were my clients, I would call them up and say, okay, we need to log into your dsbs.sba.gov profile and get this straightened out. But okay, next slide. Oh, the other thing I was going to tell you is everything that is listed in the federal database, you can toggle it to be public or private. If you make it private, that means that contracting officers or Forest Service agents cannot find you. But if you make it public, they will hide all the sensitive information and make it public. So maybe James Miller Construction, they may not like the idea that we have this up, but it is public information, and I can drill down on them and see more information about them. So that's part of the DSBS. Oh my gosh, and it's already 1 o'clock. All right, so let's zip on through this. On the veteran side of things, okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. We kind of talked about that. This is kind of the same thing. And, you know, when I do the certification page, we're going to go into this some more. But yeah, you have to have a DUNS number and have a SAM registration. And actually right up here under where it says DUNS validation, I have an error on there. It should say the second bullet, this eliminates veteran frustration when submitting applications when incorrect DUNS or incomplete SAM registration. So anyway, I apologize for that. Next slide. Okay, so now what? That you're registered. Now you start the market research. You develop your marketing materials. You look for opportunities. And seriously, you just need to keep PTAC on your speed dial. And you know, we can assist you, walk you through some of these little obstacles. But the main registrations are SAM.gov and the Veterans Administration. And we'll revisit the veterans here after the break. So next slide. All right, any other questions? Yeah, this is just the next sessions. Okay, next. All right, questions?
Leslie, you mentioned the DSBS website to check for your firm's capability statement. There has been a lot of website that was shared during the session. So that just say if you have already completed your SAMS.gov registration, do you have to do a separate registration for the DSBS?
No. They pull the data from SAM, but we always recommend that if you have your SAM, yeah, you have to update SAM. You have to update your passwords. You have to update annually. Yeah, I would just go in and visit SAM and do an update on it and walk through every line, get down to the SBA page. That's the easiest way for you to get there. Open it up and then start editing your DSBS profile. And you know, if you look in my resources, you know, I have a lot of extra resources in there. But you know, if you need some help trying to figure that out, let me know.
Thank you, Leslie. And also on, sorry, I just lost my question. I'll come back.
Okay.
If I could just jump in real quick on a footnote, the YouTube links that I set up earlier, just keep in mind that if you keep that as a subscribed or share it with your company, if for some reason you lost some information, because you can drown in this PTAC info, there's so many acronyms and so many details. It's just really handy to be able to go back, look through it, and it say, for example, the owner of the company wants to come down and find out what you've been at. You could just hand him that, and after about 5 minutes, he'll understand that you're buried too, and you're trying to figure it out. So make sure you hit those links.
Thanks, Andrew.
And lastly, you mentioned earlier that there's the beta SAM that's coming live on the 26th. So if a firm wants to update their SAM.gov registration, whether to add new NEST codes or capability statement, should they use the new beta SAM or?
I would recommend doing it before it goes to beta SAM.
You mean,
know, because really the learning curve is not going to be fun on the new SAM. And if you know the old SAM, I would just go in there and do it now.
okay, so get in touch with old Sam and then update the old Sam.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and it's relative to when you expire. You know, if you're expiring like in October, November, you know, maybe it's okay, you know, but it's 1 year from the last date of update. So, you know, if you don't expire till, you know, next March, yeah, you can do it today and you'll expire next April. And before we get started, we have Lily Keefe here. And Lily is from the Northwest Small Business Transportation Resource Center. And, you know, without her hard work, you know, we wouldn't be here today. But so we really appreciate the support that she has given us. And Lily, do you have some words of wisdom for our audience?
I just want to encourage everybody, if you need bonding assistance, financial assistance, talk to us directly, because we do have separate funding for company who will apply for the bonding. And we could provide CPA service, bookkeeping, anything related to financial system at your company to make your company, you know, run great operation. So yeah, talk to us. And on behalf of USDOT Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, we just want to say thank you for joining us today, and feel free to reach out to me. I mean, maybe something that you guys have any problem or dispute, because last time we have a client who has problem with the public agency. They needed some help, so they come to us. So yeah, just share with us your problems and challenges, and we will try to help you guys. And I just want to say thank you so much. That's all. And thank you, Leslie. You're great. I mean, this workshop is not going to happen without you. So I just want to say thank you to PTAC.
Thanks, Lily. Okay, well, I think that we'll be ready to go. I'm waiting for the screen to be shared. So I'm going to drive the bus here a little bit if I can get my PowerPoint up for you. So if Jessica's around, I need you guys to share the screen. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about certifications. And you know, there's so much content that it's going to take us a little while to get through this, but let me go back. Okay, so again, this is provided by Washington PTAC. And the next slide is just all the PTAC propaganda. And now we're just going to talk about getting certified. So as we move through this, we're going to go through Washington State and then on the federal side of it. And on the Washington State side, we're going to, you know, because we talked about that in the previous class, I'm going to bring up the slideshow. So Lily, if you would move to the next slide, please. Or not Lily, Jessica, sorry. Okay, so we're gonna, so in the OMWBE side of things, we're gonna have a guest here at 1:45. His name is Caleb McAville, and we'll give you his contact information in the chat. But we're going to kind of go over some of the highlights on here. So next slide. And we've already covered the electronic business solutions. So next slide. And the screenshot. So we're going to just kind of walk through these that we kind of did before. Okay, so on the veteran side, there's one slide on here, the next slide. And then the slide after this. Okay, this one here is your point of contact. Jennifer Montgomery for the DVA of Washington, and simple items, DD 214. If you don't have it, they are very good at getting you that information, your UBI NAICS code, whether or not you're SDVOSB or VOSB. And the reality is on the SDVOSB, if you have applied for a service-connected disability and you receive the letter back from the VA and they have established that you have 0% disability, then you still qualify as a service-disabled vet. It's anywhere from 0 to 100% disability will qualify you at the federal level for sure. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Office of Minority and Women Business Enterprises. So they have a couple different sections. One is federal certifications, and then the other is state. So at the federal level, you can be a disadvantaged business enterprise, or you can be airport concessionaire, disadvantaged business enterprise, or a small business enterprise. And that particular program is race and gender neutral. Next slide. MBE, minority business enterprise, are owned by minorities. And in the state of Washington, I honestly don't know if they go by the same guidelines as the federal does, but traditionally Native American, African American, Asian Americans qualify as minority. Hispanic Americans, they qualify as minority. Women, and then a minority women business enterprise, and then a combination, which is both women and minorities combined. And then there's one called socially and economically disadvantaged, which is owned by a non-minority men who are found to be socially and economically disadvantaged. And they look at these on a case-by-case basis. So, could be based off of religion, ethnicity, gender preference, could be anything. Next slide. And we've seen this before. The OMWBE is the only agency that charges a fee to be registered. That's a state agency. And at the federal level, there are no fees for federal registration unless you are third party certified for women-owned small business. Okay, next slide. All right, so in order for you to be OMWBE certified, there's a lot of supporting documentation that you need. And you need your tax returns. If your company is started less than a year ago, you need a profit and loss statement. And one of the realities during COVID is the impact to profit and loss. And even if you have negative numbers, you should apply. But historically, negative profit and loss on a federal level will take you out of consideration. So you need to be showing a profit, even a small profit. And on the owner side of it, you have to fill out a personal net worth statement. And I believe they use the same one as the Small Business Administration. And then they also want 3 years of taxes filed and copies of the returns. On the ownership side of it, they need all the business structure documents like partnership agreements, LLC agreement, articles of incorporation, operating agreements, everything relative to your company. Current resumes of all the eligible owners and key personnel. As a woman-owned small business, maybe the only key personnel I have is a young man, but I am the majority owner. So they look at the key personnel, and what they're looking for is experience, trying to determine that you are capable of performing the tasks on the contract. You also have to show your initial investment in the business, all your startup costs, bank statements, loan agreements, purchase and sale agreements. You need copies of your rent or lease agreements, if you don't own the property, and a list of all the equipment owned, rented, or leased, and any contracts that you have. They'll need copies of that, and the point is they want to assign the right NAICS codes for you. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. So this is the new and improved OMWBE website. And the red arrows, you apply for certification and how to use the certification system. I looked at that yesterday, and they don't have any current trainings in there, but I imagine that that's going to be coming forward. And that'll be one of the questions that we'll ask our guest is, how far down the road are the training sessions? Next slide. And actually on that slide, I had that link that'll take you right to it. And then once you get in there, you have to create an account and make sure you keep track of your login and your passwords. And they have a user manual that you can download. So feel free to download that if it's not in my resource folder. So next slide. One more. Okay. Yep. So did we get kicked out? All right. So in here, you could look and see if your federal tax ID number is already in the system. If not, you can put it in. And then this is, just minimize screenshots of business name. If you're Billy Bob's Construction Company, but you're doing business as Pine Creek Construction, you need to make sure all of this is actually filled out correctly. All right, next slide. Okay, so maybe we'll move into this a little bit. And I don't know, if Caleb's on the line yet?
Yes, he is.
Oh, good. Maybe we'll stop here and we'll introduce you to Caleb. And so Caleb, tell me how to pronounce your last name. I had McAville.
Very close, McInville. Yeah.
McInville. Okay, I got it. Thank you. So Caleb is with the Office of OMWBE. And I'm sure that if they don't have questions today, that they will have lots and lots of questions. So we'll let you do your little spiel. And one of the important things that I would like to know is when the trainings will come on for how to complete your applications. Back in the day, I had workshops in Spokane where, you know, your team would come to Spokane and we'd do like a 3-hour session in our big conference room. And, you know, we would just, everybody would sit down and we'd work through it. And I think there were like 2 or 3 OMWBE there, you know, giving us a hand and getting everybody through the prospect. So welcome aboard, and it's all yours.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Caleb McInvale, and as Leslie said, I'm with the Washington State Office of Minority and Women's Business Enterprises. I'm just going to share my screen here really quick. Hopefully everyone can see my little slideshow here that I have. And get started here. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about our organization, talk about our different certifications, what different types of certifications we offer, what they're for. Then I'm going to jump into who's eligible for our certifications. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how the application works. And then we'll hopefully have a few minutes for questions and answers. And I will answer that question Leslie had about our classes. That's something we're currently doing online right now, and I can put a link into the chat box for that. But I'm just going to jump in here. So first of all, OMWBE, or the Office of Minority and Women's Business Enterprise, we're part of the state government here in Washington, and we're tasked with certifying primarily women or minority-owned businesses, but also other small businesses, and ensuring that Washington State is spending its money equitably. So whenever a business is working with an agency, we track agencies' spending and make sure that how the public funds that are being spent by agencies and public universities are done in an equitable fashion, and that women and minority-owned businesses and other small businesses are included. So one of the main ways we do that is through certification. You may have heard some previously about some of the federal certifications. We have state certifications here in Washington. And so we certify small businesses primarily that are owned by women or minorities, but also other disadvantaged individuals as well. Business owners will provide us with information about their company, and we're going to verify that each one of these businesses meets the certification criteria before we can certify them. So we have 2 main certification types, sort of programs that we offer. There's a federal certification, and then there's a state certification. So our federal certification program is not for working directly with the federal government, like for some of the certifications through the SBA. Our certification program is working for federally funded projects with state agencies. So the federal certification is specific for transportation projects that are funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation, but that are operated by a state agency. So if the State Department of Transportation is constructing a new road or something like that, then, and there's funding coming from the U.S. Department of Transportation, that's where this certification program fits in. And those are largely transportation related work under that federal certification, but there's a lot of support work for some of these larger projects. So even if you're not in or engineering or anything like that, there's still a lot of opportunities here for businesses to find work at these if you're a consultant or you provide supplies or other things like that. Then we also have a state certification, and this is broadly applicable to any project or any good or service that the state wants to purchase. So this can be transportation projects that aren't federally funded, but it could also be just purchasing office supplies or any training for state employees, is any assistance that a state agency needs. And there's a wide variety of different types of work that can fall underneath this. Many companies will have both certifications. The criteria are nearly identical in most cases, but I'll dig into that in just a second. So there's some specific certification types underneath each one of these umbrellas. So I'm going to cover these pretty briefly here, but you don't need to remember all of these individual certification types. You don't need to know all these acronyms. That's okay. It's more just to give you an idea of what's available. So underneath the federal certification, the one, if you've probably heard about it before, is the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, or DBE certification. That's the primary women or minority or otherwise disadvantaged owned business certification for working on transportation projects. So if you're a woman or minority owned business and you want to work on transportation projects, that's the certification you're probably going to look for. There's also an airport concession disadvantaged business enterprise certification that's specific if you're working at an airport as a concessionaire. It's pretty narrow, but if you are in that line of business and you're a woman or minority owned business, that's a certification that's eligible for you. We also just have a general small business certification. This is available to people of any race or gender who own a business and it's a small business for working on federal transportation projects. I know the State Department of Transportation is going to be coming out with mandatory goals for small businesses. So if you are a small business and you don't have the certification, you work in the transportation sector at all or want to work on transportation projects, that's also a beneficial certification for you. The state certification, the certifications are just broken down by the demographics of the business owner. They all provide the same benefit. And each one of these different types is just who happens to own the business. So for example, a minority business enterprise is a minority male owned business. Most of the rest of these are self-explanatory, except for the last two, which are kind of special case certifications. But we don't have a general small business certification on the state side that's only for the federal. So federally funded transportation projects. State certifications for small business is not done by our agency, but done by the Department of Enterprise Services through their WEBS, which is the Washington Electronic Business Solution System, which is a very simple process that you can just register as a small business. But we don't provide that certification here. But if you're wondering why it might be good for your business to get certified, I've talked about this a little bit already, but primarily it helps your business become more competitive, particularly when working with the government. If you are wanting to work on some of those federal projects, either as a DBE or as an SBE, which is the SBE is just the general small business certification that's available for that. Federal projects will have mandatory goals for participation for certified businesses. This means that if the prime contractor doesn't meet their goals on these projects, they could be sanctioned, they could even be debarred. There can be serious consequences for contractors that don't try to meet their goals on these projects or don't meet their goals. So it makes certified businesses extremely competitive when they want to work on these projects. It makes it much, much easier to get work if you have the proper certification on these federally funded transportation projects. Because if the contractor doesn't get their goal, then they, again, as I mentioned, could face serious contract penalties. These are mandatory goals. They're not on the federal projects. They're not voluntary. They're not just for, they're not like there's any, so there's negative consequences that will happen to the contractor if they don't meet their goal. The state, on all state contracts, so non-federally funded, there is also voluntary goals that we can make your business more competitive. It's not quite as powerful as the federal funded transportation projects, but it's a lot broader in scope and not just in that transportation sector. We work actively with state agencies, set goals for them, and try to get them to participate. But currently all goals on state-funded projects are voluntary and aspirational at this time. It does make your business more competitive though when you're working on those state contracts. Particularly now, it's a big push from the governor to work on business equity, and I'm expecting to see more and more of these type of, more and more push towards supplier diversity with the state as we go along. Some private companies will also use our certifications, but the main purpose of the certification is for working with the government. Also, regardless of your certification type, it can just increase your business's visibility. All certified businesses go on public directory of certified firms, and essentially it's free advertising for your company. If anyone's looking for services by one of our firms, you can search that, find your company, make sure that you're included in some of those lists. Finally, also, firms with the state certification are eligible for our link deposit loan program, which provides reduced interest rates on business loans. It's an up to 2% interest rate reduction on a small business loan. Essentially, by being certified, the state will subsidize your loan and give you an interest rate reduction on that if it's with participating banks. And there's a list of banks on our website. But that's only for the state certification program. So what does it mean to be a small or one of our certified businesses? For each one of these qualifications I'm going to list here, businesses need to meet all of the qualifications. I'm going to call out one exception when we get to it, specifically for the small business enterprise certification. But all the rest of these are going to apply to every single certification type, regardless of the race and gender of the owner. So we verify that all businesses are small in order to be eligible for certification. This is a pretty large limit. We use the Small Business Administration size standard, which may have been discussed previously, which is based on your industry, and it shifts a little bit depending on that. But for most businesses, this is pretty high. And regardless of the industry, we do have an overall cap as well, which is based on a company's gross receipts. They can't exceed $23.98 million a year. But that's a pretty hefty limit, and most businesses are going to sit comfortably underneath this. Businesses need to be able to be licensed to do their work in Washington. They need to be incorporated and set up, but there's no requirement that a company needs to be operating for a certain period of time. Companies also need to be able to independently perform their services. They can't rely on some other business to or a large portion of their base work, and they need to have access to all the necessary equipment and staff they need to do their work before we can certify them. Generally speaking, except for that small business certification that I mentioned, the certification is for women and minorities or otherwise disadvantaged individuals. But for the small business certification, it is available for anyone as long as you meet the other criteria. So in order to be eligible for the certification, an eligible person or a group of eligible people, so typically that's women or minorities, but as I mentioned, that's not the case for the small business, need to own at least 51% of the business. So they need to own the majority of the business. This can be one person that owns 60% of the company or something like that, but it could also be a group of people together that owned 60, 75%, even on just barely 51% is okay as well. However, regardless of how much of the business those people own, the majority owners of the business also need to show that they control the business, that they make day-to-day decisions on behalf of the business, and they're the ones running the show. They can't have I'd sort of hire a general manager and sit back and not be actively involved in the business, or it can't be a minority owner, so someone who owns a lesser part of the company, say like there's two business owners that own 60% between them, and there's one person that owns 40%. That 40% owner can't be running the company. It has to be the people that make up the majority of the company that run the company. Regardless of the race and gender of anyone involved in the business, and this is also true for the small business certification, there's a net worth limit, which is $1.32 million for each individual owner. And if someone exceeds that, they're not eligible for certification. There are some carve outs in that net worth limit, like we don't look at the value of your house if you do live in it and you own your home. And also we don't look at the value of the business that's applying for certification when we're getting to that number.
Hello, if I may interrupt. We have a question that came through chat.
Sure.
Someone is wondering about how do a small business do self-certification for SBE?
The self-certification for small businesses, are you asking about the state or the federal? Because there's two different ways to do that. For federally funded projects in Washington state, there is not a self-certification. That is only through our office, and it's a full certification. There is not a self-certification that can get you access to the mandatory federal program in Washington. It is only through our office, and it requires a full application. The self-registration as a small business is through the Department of Enterprise Services, and it's through their WEBS system. And I can put a link into the chat shortly after this. about where that is. And it's a pretty quick registration that you just type in information about your business. And essentially it's a box that you can check that says, yes, I'm a small business. And it lists the requirements for that on the site that says there.
Thank you.
This is Lila Keefe. I just want to get clarification. So if you certified as a SBE for the state, so meaning that the state agencies have SBE goals, right?
That's not something that we monitor. We don't monitor the small business goals for agencies. Our focus, perhaps unsurprisingly given our name, is women or minority owned and otherwise disadvantaged businesses. The small business programs for the state is managed through the Department of Enterprise Services. And there is a push similarly to work more with women or minority owned businesses, to work more with small businesses as well. I don't know if they have discrete goals at the agency level, but there is preference for small businesses as well on some state contracting, and all the businesses that we certify count as small businesses for state contracting, regardless of whether they're women owned or minority owned. They still count even if you haven't made that self-registration on webs. They all count as small businesses. But just for the general small business certification or self-certification, that's through the Department of Enterprise Services. And I can't give too much detail on that. That's just because our agency doesn't deal with it.
Thank you.
Okay, for our application, and this is going to be different than the self-registration as a small business with the Department of Enterprise Services. For our application, it's all online, available on our website, which is listed right there, omwbe.wa.gov. And from there, you can create an online application and an account for your business. And just a thought before you get started on that actual application, you'll want to think whether you want the state state certification, the federal certification, or if you're looking for both certifications at the same time. If you do want both certifications, we can give you both certifications with one application. And you can do that just by submitting a federal application. The first question of the federal application is, do you also want state certification? And all you have to do is say yes, and then we can get you certified that way as well, because the criteria are nearly identical. But again, if you are looking for the federal small business certification that we offer, there isn't a corresponding state certification that our agency offers, so we could only give you the federal certification in that context. Again, it's all online. You'll answer questions, upload documents to our website in that secure online portal there. It'll save your work as you go along, so you don't have to fill it out in one sitting or anything like that, and you can work through the whole application sort of at your leisure then, and then submit it once you're finished. There's some small fees associated with the federal and state certification. And there's some slight differences in how the renewal works with them, which I'm going to briefly cover here. The federal certification renews every year. So once you've submitted an application, it will renew annually. So say you get certified on the 1st of May, then of 2021, then in May 1st, 2022, you'll have to submit your renewal before then. And just make sure that renewal is in on time. We do have a lot of businesses that sometimes forget to renew their certification, and both under federal and state law, we will have to remove your certification if you do not submit renewals. Luckily, the renewal is pretty easy. It's pretty basic documentation. You have to provide your most recent tax return and sign a form, and that's about it. The initial application is pretty detailed. We do ask for a lot of information to prove the criteria that I mentioned, but we can help you in working through that application, and I'll give a link to some of the classes that we do that with. The state certification, on the other hand, renews every 3 years. So if you got certified in 2021, you wouldn't have to recertify until 2024. But it's a relatively similar renewal, except we just need 3 years of business taxes as opposed to 1. And there's small fees associated with that. They're listed here. And if you do want both certifications, as I mentioned, you just submit the federal application and pay that one federal application fee, and you can get both certifications. But going forward for both the federal and state certifications, you will have to pay the renewal fees that are associated with it. This is, if you do have questions about our certification, our main phone line is listed here along with our technical assistance email, which is probably those two are the best ways to get a hold of people for general questions about certification. Technical assistance email gets shared out to all the certification analysts, which are the people that actually process the certification applications. So if you have any technical questions, feel free to ask them. My phone number and email is also listed here. If people do have questions related to the application or need some help, I used to be a certification analyst, so I can answer very detailed and technical questions as well, and I'm happy to help with that. And you can also follow us on social media. We regularly post opportunities for businesses, grants, free classes, and things like that. So if you're interested in learning more, give us a follow, and hopefully there's some good information for you there too. And just before I move into sort of some time for questions, I think it was Leslie was asking about our online certification classes. We don't do them in person right now. We're still in virtual outreach only due to the coronavirus, but we do 2 monthly classes on certification. One of them is somewhat similar to this, which is just a sort of brief overview, but in a bit more depth than we're talking about today. For you, those of you on this call, you might not need to go to that one as you've covered most of the information here. But there's also a certification 201 class where I will walk through the entire federal application from creating an account to every single question in the application, explaining what we're asking about, talking about common mistakes and things like that. So if anyone does have any difficulty going through the application, they don't understand sort of what it's asking about, or there's a document that you're not really sure what you should attach for that, feel free to attend that. I'm going to put the link to the Eventbrite for both classes in the chat box. But that's about it for me. Does anyone have any other questions?
Caleb, is there still a time limitation that just say as soon as you started the application process, is it still 6 months for you to complete the application?
I think once you've started the application, the system automatically gives you 90 days to submit the application. That's not a hard deadline. You can ask for it to be extended. And you'll see once you start the application, the first up on the top, it'll give you a little date for deletion that's listed in the application there. And if you don't complete the application by that deadline, it will be deleted automatically by the system. We can extend it. So if you're coming up close to that deadline, please give us a call at that main line or email that technical assistance email. But don't do it the day before, as I think the deletion happens very early in the morning before when that transition happens. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning or something like that on that day. So once it's been deleted, there's nothing we can do. We can't recover it. But we can extend that timeline. And if you are having some trouble with completing it in that 90-day timeline, feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email. We're here to get companies certified. We do want to help them and make it simpler. We can't tell you how to answer the question, but we can explain it, and we can sort of explain what typical issues people have and what sorts of documents we expect to see.
Caleb, we do have a question that came through the chat. They're wondering if OMWBE has a LinkedIn account.
I don't think we have LinkedIn. I don't manage our social media. We may have had one in the past, but I'm not sure how active it is right now. Our main forms of social media are Twitter and Facebook that we use. We also have a newsletter as well that we send out monthly with similar information. I can get back to you on whether or not we do have LinkedIn, but I don't think we're very active in it currently.
And how does the business sign up for your newsletter?
There's a link on our website that businesses can sign up. I can drop that in the chat. Just 1 second here.
Thank you.
I'll do it after my presentation because I'll need to take down the sharing here along with the link to the web's registration as well.
So Caleb, I have a question. In regards to all of the different types of certifications that that you process, can you give us a really simplified answer on DBE qualifications? Disadvantaged business enterprise.
Yeah, that's all the qualifications that I mentioned before were the qualifications that applied to the DBE program. So it has to be a small business, which is underneath that SBA limit that I mentioned. It has to be owned by a woman or minority or someone who's otherwise disadvantaged, which means someone who's faced discrimination in U.S. society. And the people that are women or minorities or otherwise disadvantaged also have to control the business as well, and they need to meet that personal net worth requirement that I stated.
Thank you.
Hi, Caleb.
So-
Andrew here. Just curious, I know there's a lot of overlap between native-owned businesses and minority-owned. How much of that do you guys cover? And like, I know there was a native PTAC for a while. I'm not sure if they're still around. But should a native-owned entity come straight to you guys first, or is that a different area that they should head?
We do included in the minority-owned business certification is the native-owned business certification as well. They qualify for that. So if you're looking to do business with the DBE certification, native-owned businesses qualify for that certification, similarly to the state certification as a minority-owned business too. And that's businesses that are owned by a tribal individual or also a tribe as well. It also includes Alaskan Native corporations for the federal certification too. So we're inclusive of minority and native for our certification process. There are other agencies that assist native-owned businesses and sort of with native relations, such as the Governor's Office on Indian Affairs. But in terms of more looking for certifications with the state, we're the one-stop shop for minority women-owned business certifications, which would be, in this case, inclusive of native-owned businesses.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Caleb. Okay, last call. So thank you, Caleb, for coming and spending time with our group today. You know, OMWBE is always just a fountain of knowledge. And I'm glad that you guys are weathering the Zoom world. And it is great to see your presentation. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'll stay on a little bit so that I can get the links to the web's
Okay.
registration. I'm in the newsletter as well. And if anyone does come up with any questions in the interim, please feel free to just go ahead and ask.
All right, thank you. Okay, so, excuse me. Jessica, let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. So we're just starting on the federal level.
I'm sorry, Leslie, there's a little lag time here, so pardon
Okay.
the pause here.
Okay. So while we're waiting, we were just covering the state of Washington resources of registration and certification. And now we're moving on to the federal side of things. And our first stop is probably going to be Small Business Administration. And as we do that, okay, it's coming up. All right. So we're at about slide 21. Okay, so the federal business certifications include small business, veteran and service disabled veteran-owned small businesses, woman and economically disadvantaged women-owned small business, hub zone, and which is the historically underutilized business zone, and then the 8A business development program. All right, next slide. So we're going to talk about federal small business certifications, and as opposed to all the other certifications. It's on the next slide, Jessica. It is, small business is an automatic classification based on your NAICS code. And, that parallels what Caleb was talking about. And it, we talked earlier about the NAICS code will determine either based on revenue or number of employees based off of your original or your primary NAICS code. And so if your primary NAICS code is painting, it has a different value than, if you're doing house painting than if you're doing general construction. And I did include in our packet the NAICS code breakdown. And so again, and you can download it from this website, either in Excel or PDF format. And it's real easy to navigate. Okay, next slide. So this slide actually is going to show you a screenshot of the federal 236220 commercial construction. And if you are in industrial construction, it's a different NAICS code, but it has the same dollar value. And but if you are in a siding contractor, the value is $16.5 million. So, just so you can get a visual as to how they lay this out. Next slide. And this one is where I had talked to you about the aircraft manufacturing. And, they bumped it up. It is 15,000 if you're doing aircraft engine or engine parts. But if you're doing other parts, it's 1,250 employees. But again, it's either or. So you could make $40 million a year, but if you don't have more than 1,500 employees, then you're still classified as small business. Next slide. All right, let's talk about veterans. The veteran-owned small business, we kind of talked about this before. The primary consideration is veteran ownership. And the ownership has to be 51% or more, regardless of how many partners that you have in your company. And you have to have overall control of the company and provide the documentation. So the next slide is going to show you the required documentation, business license, resumes, tax forms, payroll, your bank signature cards. And of all of these things on here, the one that always gave my clients the most trouble was getting the bank signature cards because everything is digitized now. Any contracts that you have, any lease agreements, operating agreements, voting agreements, the minutes. If you're a really small company, maybe you've not been real good at paying attention to taking your minutes. Articles of organization, which are not the same as the operating agreement. Stock registers, franchises, joint venture agreements, and mentor protege. These are all things that you will need to have. And my recommendation for all of my clients is for you to build a digital repository, because as you go through these processes, you're going to see that more often than not, if you wanted to become registered with OMWBE, they are going to want the same type of information. So you just need to have a secure vault or repository where you can keep all this information at your fingertips. Okay, the next one is the federal woman-owned small business and the economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business. And a lot has changed over the last 3 or 4 years. When they first established these, you were self-certified. And if I decided on a wild hair just to start a business today, tomorrow, I could be self-certified as a woman-owned small business. But now they have done away with the self-certification, and you need to go through either the SBA or through one of the 4 entities that they have given this responsibility, and fill out their application forms. And the reality is the WOSB you can do for free through the SBA. The EDWOSB, you have to go through one of these other agencies. So yeah, you just need to pay attention to what their requirements are. And again, you need to have your own repository for all of your materials. And go ahead and go to the next slide. SBA can certify only WSB certification. You have to go through one of these others. And so the thing is, for either classification, you have to have a NAICS code that is on the list dedicated to woman-owned or economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business. So I gave you a little sample. If you do manufactured home manufacturing, that NAICS code is for economically disadvantaged women-owned small business, or prefabricated or other miscellaneous wood products. But if you go down to commercial printing, that is set aside for woman-owned. The thing is, if you are economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business, you are also woman-owned small business. But it's not the flip side. If you're a woman-owned small business, that does not automatically make you economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business unless you go through that certification. Next slide. So the federal woman-owned small business, first of all, you have to have an active registration in the federal database, sam.gov, but you have to have, or woman has to be 51% of the ownership. So again, if you're a woman and you go into business with 2 of your brothers and everything's equal, then you're not a woman-owned small business. Even if you have 34%, you are not a woman-owned small business. you have to have the 51%. And you have to have proof of citizenship, birth certificate or unexpired passport are the common ones used, resume, joint venture agreements. If you're a corporation, you have to have articles of incorporation, stock files, stock ledgers, corporate bylaws. If you're an LLC, they have different requirements, the operating agreement and the articles of organization. Partnership, you have to have that agreement, any amendments. And if you're a sole proprietor, you have to have your DBA, doing business as, and you can get this from Washington State Department of Revenue. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about those economically disadvantaged women-owned small business. They are, so to be economically disadvantaged, it has the same type of criteria that you would need to be certified through OMWBE. You have to have a net worth less than $750,000, your own personal individual net worth. Your adjusted gross income over 3 years cannot exceed the average of $350,000 a year. That's W-2s or 1099s. And the fair market value of all the assets cannot exceed $6 million. So in a community property state, this trips people up a lot because you have to pay attention to, you know, your net worth and your spouse's net worth. And if you use the SBA personal net worth form, you know, you can break it down. And because you have a spouse, you're going to have to provide that individual's information also to the for certification. Okay, next slide. Let's talk about HUBZone. Yeah, this is like the best kept secret in government contracting. Historically underutilized business zones are based on geography. And the US Census Bureau is the one who determines, you know, what's underutilized in a business area. So your business has to be a small business. It has to be at least 51% owned by US citizens or Alaska Native Corporation, Native Hawaiian Corporation, or an Indian tribe. And you have to have your principal office located in the HUBZone. 35% of your employees have to live in a HUBZone. If you live on the Olympic Peninsula and you live in Clallam or Jefferson County, the whole county is a HUBZone. So the odds are everyone you hire from the county qualifies. And I did include a checklist in the Dropbox for you. So before we go to the next slide, the thing about the HUBZone is they have a lot of data that they ask from you. You know, besides all your company information, you know, there's a spreadsheet that you need to complete with all of your employee information on it. And the one in the Dropbox actually has some formulas that will calculate, you know, if you're over or under, you know, the 35%. And then the other thing is for every employee that you put on that list, you have to provide supporting documentation that they actually reside there. And they'll take utility bills or, you know, whatever you have. The one thing they won't take is a cell phone bill. because that makes you too mobile, I guess. But anyway, the hub zone is a lot of extra work for your HR department. And so you have to kind of take that into consideration. And to apply for a hub zone certification, just like all of these now, you have to go through the Small Business Administration, and they're going to extract data from SAM. So you can't be certified as a hub zone if you don't have a sam.gov profile. So, you have to be registered in SAM. And sometimes, that one place is the biggest stumbling block. Okay, next slide. So this is all about the 8A Business Development Program through the SBA. It's a 9-year program that provides training and counseling and marketing and technical assistances to the companies that have been certified. It's broken down into 2 sections. The first 4 years are the development stage, and the last 5 years are the transition stage. And the goal is to have the firms graduate and go on and thrive in the business environment. So again, it has to be 51% owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. And, the SBA considers African American, Hispanic, Asian Pacific, Native American, subcontinent Asian Americans to be socially and economically disadvantaged. And sometimes, they, like if you have an immigrant who came like from the Middle East or from Latvia or Estonia, that's a case by case scenario, but it mostly has to do with companies or countries that we're not at war with. So, or countries that are not economically depressed. If it was, like somebody from the country of India, that are not known for, good economic areas, they may be accepted. However, if it's like from the country of Jordan, they will not be accepted. And so like it's a case by case basis. Okay, next slide. So, and effective last year, they made some changes, but again, 51% owned, and the personal net worth is the same criteria as the woman owned. And it's really kind of nice to see these things level out, because before they were all over the place, but now $750,000 personal net worth. This says adjusted gross income of $350,000 and $6 million or less in assets. And the other criteria is that you have to demonstrate good character and the potential to perform or to succeed. So, it's a great opportunity for those that are approved, and you get a lot of help moving forward on it. So the next slide is actually like a little one-stop shop on the SBA website for 8A woman-owned or hub zone certification. And they have a little qualifying questionnaire. And anyway, it's real easy to navigate. So I would recommend that you take a look at this. And again, if you have any questions on any of this, give me a call. So I think we will go ahead and open this up for any additional questions. And remind you guys that PTACs are all over Washington State. So if you're not on the Olympic Peninsula, we will connect you with the right individual. So any questions?
Leslie, you mentioned about getting certified in HubZone. Does that require recertification once you get certified?
Yes, and the thing about HubZone is they're kind of rearranging all of the criteria now. A lot of it has to do with economics and COVID. And so they've extended expiration dates on a lot of things. And one of the big areas is the hub zone and the fact that people may be moving out of a hub zone to look for other economic opportunities. But everything needs either just a renewal, or they may audit you and ask for updated verification of the employee status. So it's a very organic process, and you just can't apply and then think, well, 10 years later when the census comes out, I'll redo it. But yeah, everything is kind of in a state of flux. And one of the big advantages on the hub zone is there's a bid preference for hub zone companies. If we talked about this last week, where Mel and I were going to compete against each other on a federal contract, and he was hub zone and I'm not hub zone. He can bid 10% higher than me, if I'm the low bidder. And because he's hub zone, he would actually be given the award. So 23% of all federal contracts are required to be set aside. And with that, there's a breakdown on woman-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned small businesses as to how much those set-asides are. And they range from 3% to 5%. And historically, the hub zone is the one that they always miss. They have a tough time reaching those goals. So actually, I was just going to try to pull this up right here real quick. And actually, there's a ton of resources that I can send to you that will show, if you have a particular agency in mind, like the U.S. Forest Service or the Department of Interior, how they did on their goals. And anyway, so we can put that information in that resource folder. And also, speaking of the resource folder, we did put the YouTube link in there for the government contracting class that we had last week. So any other links, we can add on there, or I'll just drop them into that resource folder. So, if there's anything that you need, feel free to, just shoot me a quick note, and we'll take care of it.
And Leslie, just to follow up on the hub zone certification, once you're certified as a hub zone business, is there any benefit for you when you are pursuing any state or local project that may have federal dollars?
No. Not unless it's written into a specific contract, but that's fairly rare, if ever. The general answer is no. Anything with, that's federally funded, there's still accountability, but there's not necessarily the same goals, because it's not just a contracting officer, managing it. It's been reassigned to, the Department of Enterprise Services or somebody. So, yeah. So there really isn't.
Jeff, you have a question on the SBA certification documentation. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Well, it's just, I've been looking at an SBE certification, and I was really kind of taken back by the tremendous amount of documentation that they remember. It's like pages and pages of documentation, including personal tax returns, trust agreements. I mean, just about everything. And some of it has to be notarized. I mean, am I looking at that correctly?
Yeah, and that's just it really is exactly the same with the federal government. So the SBE certification, state of Washington, but that actually, if you can get through this paperwork, it kind of levels out the playing field a little bit for you. Whereas, if you don't, then it's a little bit harder for you to compete. But the reality is, it's not just the SBE, it's the DBEs, all the others have to have that same type of information. So,
Okay.
Yeah, they're not just picking on you. It's everybody.
Okay. Just seems really intrusive, that's all. It's,
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was wondering,
Okay.
I had a couple of clients that I used to recommend hub zones to, and those maps have since shifted. When the hub zones shift, what kind of grandfathering do they do? Does your company just have to move into the new hub zone? And these maps, where do we find them?
Well, you used to have to move, but because of COVID, they're grandfathering you in now for 10 years, for your location criteria. So, yeah, it's a brave new world when it comes to government. And, it just, they're shapeshifters, every time you turn around, they're changing this and updating that. So it's really important that if you don't have the time to stay on top of all of these changes, that, you tap into PTAC, because it's PTAC's job to get these updates and then to dispense it to everybody that needs to know it. So thank you, Andrew.
Hey,
So I have a question on the 8A. Can OMWBE be 8A as well?
You're breaking up a little bit. So did you say 8A?
Yeah, so if you have an OMWBE, can you also have a federal 8A certification? Or is it, if you're a woman-owned business, can you have the 8A as well?
Okay, so anything that you get at the state level, you have to reinvent the wheel at the federal level and reapply everything at the federal, and vice versa. If you're 8A at the federal level, in order to be MBE or DBE at the state level, you have to, well, unless it's DBE. If it's MBE, you have to start over at the state level. If it's a DBE, some of that information is already in there, but you still have to provide all the additional documentation for that.
I was talking about an OMWBE, so woman-owned business.
Yeah.
They can be an 8A.
Yeah. Yeah, if you meet the qualifications. So woman-owned, if you're a minority, Hispanic, African American, Asian American, whatever it is, yes, you can be both of those. And the thing is, on the federal certifications, if you are part of a Native American tribe, it has to be a federally recognized tribe. And because if you're part of the Yaqui Nation out of Southern Arizona, okay, that's not federally recognized. And so, that would eliminate your Native American qualification. But if you're, Cherokee or Blackfoot or Spokane or, Yakima tribe, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tricia. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions?
Hi, Leslie. It's Mel.
Hi, Mel. You
Hi.
see you every week now.
Yeah, all right. So I'm looking at some of the different certifications, and it seems like there's a lot of overlap and maybe some redundancy that may not be necessary. When I look at SBE, and there was mention in some of the presentation that if you're doing some DOT work, that certification might be required. But if I'm already in SAMS and I'm really not trying to take advantage of SBE preference, I'm using veterans preference, let's say. Do I also have to do the SBE certification in order to get those contracts, or will my veterans registration or certification be adequate?
No, it won't be adequate. You have to go through the hoops and do the SBE or DBE at the state level.
Okay.
And it's one of those things that you wish that all these systems talk to each other. Well, sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for, because this is exactly what is happening with SAM.gov. So now it's talking to all of them, which will make it easier on a lot of fronts. But if you mess up on one application, it's kind of like a domino effect now, whereas before it was kind of standalone. And so if you integrate, the state having access to this information also, then it I don't know, it could compound things. But realistically, if I were a state auditor for OMWBE, and even the Department of Transportation, and they can look you up on SAM, and they can see your certifications in SAM, and they can look you up in OMWBE and see if you're certified there also. And if they're somebody doing the contract or trying to look for subs, that might be to your advantage, where they can actually get into those two portals and look at your history, your background, your past performance, everything, and make a judgment based on that. But yeah, it's kind of wonky, and it is a lot of paperwork for everybody.
So if we're looking at getting the certifications, we're a startup business and sorting through some of that, how would we know any given contract requires, I guess, how do we get certified if we find out a contract requires another certification that we currently don't have because we felt it was redundant and ridiculous? Government, we're here to help. But how would we be able to qualify for contracts if we find out that we have to get another certification, even though we're fully eligible?
Yeah. And-
timely, in a
and-
timely manner.
Yeah, well, and the timely manner, that's the problem. You know, it's like Caleb said, if they're 60 days out, what's the shelf life of a solicitation? You know, odds are not in your favor. That is something that you could attain, and they cannot consider you if you don't have that. It's like, if you don't have the right NAICS code in your SAM profile and you submitted a bid and you're fully qualified, and then they look at your NAICS code and it's not the NAICS code in the solicitation, you're done. So, it's this preliminary preparation in anticipation of where you're going. It takes a lot of heavy lifting right at the get-go. But long-term, it may pay off. But realistically, it takes a lot of time and effort to collate all this information and fill out all the forms. OMWBE, we did the complete forms like in 3 hours at my workshops in Spokane. And, so if you have everything with you and you go to one of these workshops, you could submit tonight and then 2 months down the road, hoping that you'll get that certification. But, it's like anything else. It's like when your CPA is doing your taxes and they said, oh, do you have any more 1099s? Or, what about sales tax? Or, whatever they're going to ask you. Anyway, they go through it, but they give you time to respond through OMWBE. And on the veteran side of it, though, at the state level, it's so much easier. You've already paid your dues, and thank you for your service. And they don't torture you like some agencies do in regards to the Veterans Administration. So anyway, state of Washington is really good to the veterans.
Oh, thanks. So with some of the certifications, I see some of the documents about, or some of the information about corporate documents, which as a startup, we don't have, and none of that really seems, well, a lot of it doesn't seem to apply because I'm 100% owner, but we're not a sole proprietor, we're an S Corp. So is there a way to add does not apply to some of those to kind of skip through some of that because it truly doesn't? Or do we have to fill out the entire form, scratching our head and saying, let's add an NA over here? Is that appropriate, or how do you know how that works on some of those?
Yeah, if you're a corporation, you should have articles of incorporation and, operation agreements and minutes and stock registers. And, as a legal corporation, you are required to have all those. And if you're a corporation, you had to submit that to the state of Washington. If you're an LLC, you could be a single member LLC, but you are still required to register with the Secretary of State. If I'm a proprietor that's not an LLC, I don't have to do that. But then it's all on me as a proprietor to provide them with all my personal tax returns and then my little company profit and loss or balance sheet, whatever they want. Yeah. So it, in really small companies, this is a heavy lift. If you're a medium-sized company, you have somebody there to, help you through this. If you're a large company, you just have staff, but, maybe it's a wife or a kid or whatever at home that'll help you dig through all this. But no, the fact that you put NA on there might be a red flag for them to do not look further. you know. So you don't want to throw yourself out with the bathwater.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mel.
We do have a question, a certification question that applies for federal and state contracts from Paul. Paul, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Paul, we can barely hear you.
No. No sound.
So Paul, we are having some trouble hearing you, so I'm just gonna read out loud your question real quick, if that's okay with you. So Paul's question is, are certifications required for federal and state contracts, or do they provide an added ability to apply for those contracts that requires percentage of certifications?
You can apply for, you can apply for any contractor, you know, submit a bid for any contract. Anything that's federal, they are mandated to set it aside for woman-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned, hub zone. And if you are not a veteran and Mel is a veteran, and both of you bid on this together and it's set aside for a veteran, you know, you will not be considered at all. Only Mel will get the consideration. You know, so, you know, same thing like if it's hub zone. If you live in a hub zone like Clallam County or Jefferson County, and it has to be awarded to a hub zone company, and you bid on it and you are a low bidder, but you are found not to be hub zone certified, then no, it doesn't go to you. But yeah, they mandate, you know, the feds, you know, have to give 23% of their contracts to small business. And then, you know, if they award a big contract like to Boeing or somebody or Microsoft, those contracts have to have a small business plan where they are required to set aside, you know, a certain percentage of this contract to veteran, woman, minority, hub zone companies. So, you know, even though you're not any of those, you will still qualify as small business and qualify as part of the 23% set aside. So hope that helps. Thanks, Paul.
Yes, thank you.
Oh yeah, now we hear you.
Okay, yeah, all this technology, right? So,
Yeah.
thank you. That was a
Yeah.
great session. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Mel?
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mel, do you have a follow-up question? I'm sorry, I cut you off earlier.
No, I think we pretty well covered it. I just was probably thinking and still processing.
Okay.
If I can jump in, we would like to get a federally women-owned certification, and you had mentioned now that you can just do that through the SBA.
Yes. On that one slide,
Yeah.
You can just click on the, you know, there are 3 boxes. One was 8A, hub zone and woman owned. Just click on the woman owned link on there and it'll take you, you know, directly to the whole woman owned small business process. And, you know, they want your birth certificate and they want, you know,
Sure.
you know, US citizen, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you're married, you know, make sure that your personal financial statement reflects both of you. So, if you and your spouse have $1 million in net worth, you individually have 500,000. And
Okay.
he has 500,000.
Yeah, we have it, the state certification, so I know it well.
Oh, okay, good, good, okay.
My other question is, I keep trying to figure out how to get small business certification federally, but you were saying that's not an actual certification.
Right, no, it's a classification
Class-
based on your primary NAICS code.
Okay,
So, yeah, you're automatically small business. If the revenue number that you put in SAM is less than whatever the NAICS code is, if you're in construction, it's less than $39.5 million, then, and your NAICS code is 236220, then you are small business.
I definitely continue to see that question come up if we are certified as a small business. And that has always confused me.
So it depends on who's advertising it as certified small business. Is it a state agency? Is it a federal agency? Or is it somebody like Amazon who wants a certified small business? Then what they're talking about is OMWBE and their SBE certification.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Rosanna. All right, guys.
I got one
Andrew.
more real quick. I remember at one point there was always a big crunch time for the set-asides when the feds did their audits and realized that they were about a month out maybe, and they were so many set-asides short, and the contract started being very specifically hunted and only the small businesses, but they were kind of lackadaisical at the beginning of the year. Has that changed at all, or is there still just like a period at the last month of the fiscal where they are just looking for a minority-owned, women-owned, 8A, whatever? That is still the case.
It is a feeding frenzy from July 1st to September 30th. And if they have not met their set-aside goals, they are beating the bushes for whatever the deficiency is on, they haven't met their veteran-owned small business. They haven't met the, 8A. Usually the 8A gets satisfied pretty easily. But, in woman-owned, is starting kind of to come into its own. But the hub zone and the veterans are generally overlooked until like the last quarter of the year. So Mel, as we're moving forward, knowing your veteran status and anticipating that you may want to market yourself to some federal agencies, particularly after July 1st. So then that's kind of where our next class comes in on how to do market research and what kind of things you need to pull together to connect with them. So the bottom line is on the last date of our connection, which will be April 22nd, where we have the big networking event. I sent Jessica a list earlier today, and we have a couple Navy facility guys here. We have PNNL out of Squim. They have an office in Squim. And, all of these agencies, and then we'll have, hopefully we'll have DES here, and we'll have some construction guys. And so, if you want to try to prep for that in anticipation, the first thing you need to do is be registered in SAM, get your cage code, and so that you can put that information on a brochure which they call a capability statement. But we can talk about that more next week. And in the meantime, though, if you have any questions, shoot me an email, or some of you guys actually have my phone. So give me a call, and I'm happy to visit with you and help walk you through some of this stuff.
Leslie, is it okay if I ask one dying question?
Yeah.
In one of the slides, I forgot if it was the veteran certification or the SAM certification that you mentioned that you cannot have a negative profit, otherwise it will be kicked out.
Well, a loss. Well, like on, if you're doing an 8A application for the feds, I think their expectations that you're struggling anyway. And so this might be a good opportunity for you at the 8A level. If you are a veteran where they don't have this program development for the veteran side of things, having negative numbers may not be a good thing at a federal level. So at the state level, if you're a DBE, and your financials for the last 3 years have been, in the tank, that may not be a good thing. But, if you're barely squeaking by and you have a little bit of a plus side, it may be to your advantage. But no, historically, if your financials were not potential to be good, then they would not consider you. And that's just the harsh reality. But PTACs can help on a lot of things. We can't do your accounting, but we could probably point you to somebody that can walk you through it. So
Thank you.
okay. All right, you guys, we're at 2:56. That's pretty close today. So if that's it, we'll just call it a day, and hopefully we'll see you next week. But feel free to give me a call or drop me a line or something, and I'll try to answer your questions. Okay. All right.